A monster calls. What's the use of you?
I'm going back to the hospital, Connor, his grandma said, dropping him off at his house. I don't like leaving her like this. What do you need that's so important? There's something I have to do, Connor said, looking at the home where he'd spent his entire life. It seemed empty and foreign, even though it wasn't very long since he'd left. He realized it was probably never to be his home again. I'll be back in an hour to get you, his grandma said. We'll have dinner at the hospital. Connor wasn't listening. He was already shutting the car door behind him. 1 hour, his grandma called to him through the closed door. You're going to want to be there tonight. Connor kept on walking up his own front steps. Connor? His grandma called after him, but he didn't look back. He barely heard her pull the car out onto the street and drive away. Inside, the house smelled of dust and stale air. He didn't even bother shutting the door behind him. He headed straight through to the kitchen and looked out of the window. There was the church on the rise. There was the yew tree standing guard over its cemetery. Connor went out across his back garden. He hopped up on the garden table where his mum used to drink Pimm's in the summer, and he lifted himself up and over the back fence. He hadn't done this since he was a little kid. So long ago it had been his father who'd punished him for it. The break of the barbed wire by the railway line was still there, and he squeezed through, tearing his shirt, not caring. He crossed the tracks, barely checking to see if a train was coming, climbed another fence, and found himself at the base of the hill leading up to the church. He hopped over the low stone wall that surrounded it and climbed up through the tombstones, all the while keeping the tree in his sights, and all the while it stayed a tree. Connor began to run. Wake up! He started shouting before he even reached it. Wake up! He got to the trunk and started kicking it. I said wake up! I don't care what time it is! He kicked it again, and harder, and once more, and the tree stepped out of the way so quickly that Connor lost his balance and fell.
You will do yourself harm if you keep that up,
the monster said, looming over him. It didn't work! Connor shouted, getting to his feet. You said the yew tree would heal her, but it didn't work!
I said if she could be healed, the yew tree would do it,
the monster said.
It seemed that she could not.
Anger rose even higher in Connor's chest, thumping his heart against his ribcage. He attacked the monster's legs, battering the bark with his hands, bringing up bruises almost immediately. Heal her! You have to heal her!
Connor,
the monster said. What's the use of you if you can't heal her? Connor said, pounding away. Just stupid stories and getting me into trouble and everyone looking at me like I've got a disease! He stopped before the monster had reached down a hand and plucked him in the air.
You are the one who called me, Connor O'Malley,
it said, looking at him seriously.
You are the one with the answers to these questions.
Have I called you?
Connor said, his voice boiling red, tears he was hardly aware of streaming angrily down his cheeks. It was to save her! It was to heal her! There was a rustling through the monster's leaves, like the wind stirring them into a long, slow sigh.
I did not come to heal her,
the monster said.
I came to heal you.
Me?
Connor said, stopping his squirming in the monster's hand. I don't need healing! My mum's the one who... But he couldn't say it. Even now, he couldn't say it. Even though they'd had the talk. Even though he'd known it all along. Because of course he had. Of course he did. No matter how much he'd wanted to believe it wasn't true, of course he knew. But still he couldn't say it. Couldn't say that she was... He was still crying furiously and finding it hard to breathe. He felt like he was splitting open, like his body was twisting apart. He looked back to the monster. Help me, he said quietly.
It is time,
the monster said,
for the fourth tale.
Connor let out an angry yell. No! That's not what I meant! There are more important things happening!
Yes,
The monster said.
yes, there are.
It opened its free hand. The mist surrounded them again, and once more they were in the middle of
The nightmare.
the fourth tale. Even held in the monster's huge, strong hand, Connor could feel the terror seeping into him, could feel the blackness of it all start to fill his lungs and choke them, could feel his stomach beginning to fall. No! He shouted, squirming some more, but the monster held him tight. No, please! The hill, the church, the graveyard were all gone. Even the sun had disappeared, leaving them in the middle of a cold darkness, one that had followed Connor ever since his mother had first been hospitalized, from before that when she'd started the treatment that made her lose her hair, from before that when she'd had flu that didn't go away until she went to a doctor and it wasn't flu at all, from before even that when she started to complain about how tired she was feeling ever since before all that. Ever since, forever, it felt like the nightmare had been there, stalking him, surrounding him, cutting him off, making him alone. It felt like he'd never been anywhere else. Get me out of here! He yelled. Please!
It is time
The monster said again.
for the fourth tale.
I don't know any tales! Connor said, his mind lurching with fear.
If you do not tell it,
The monster said.
I shall have to tell it for you.
It held Connor up closer to its face.
And believe me when I say, you do not want that.
Please! Connor said again. I have to get back to my mum!
But
The monster said, turning across the blackness.
she is already here.
The monster set him down abruptly, almost dropping him to the earth, and Connor stumbled forward. He recognized the cold ground under his hands, recognized the clearing he was in, bordered on three sides by a dark and impenetrable forest, recognized the fourth side, a cliff flying off into even further blackness, and on the cliff's edge his mum. She had her back to him, but she was looking over her shoulder, smiling. She looked as weak as she had been in the hospital, but she gave him a silent wave. Mom! Connor yelled, feeling too heavy to stand, as he did every time the nightmare began. You have to get out of here! His mum didn't move, though she looked a little worried at what he'd said. Connor dragged himself forward, straining at the effort. Mom! You have to run! I'm fine, darling, she said. There's nothing to worry about. Mom! Run! Please, run! But, darling, there's... She stopped and turned back to the cliff's edge as she'd heard some... No! Connor whispered to himself. He pulled himself forward some more, but she was too far to reach in time, and he felt so heavy. There was a low sound from below the cliff,
A rumbling, booming noise, like something big was moving down below. Something bigger than the world, and it was climbing up the cliff face.
Connor? His mum asked, looking back at him, but Connor knew it was too late.
The real monster was coming.
Mom! Connor shouted, forcing himself to his feet, pushing against the invisible weight, pressing down on him. Mom! Connor! His mum shouted, backing away from the cliff's edge, but the booming was getting louder and louder and louder still. Mom! He knew he wouldn't get there in time, because with a roar, a cloud of burning darkness lifted two giant fists over the cliff top. They hovered in the air for a long moment over his mum as she tried to scramble back. But she was too weak, much too weak, and the fists rushed down together in a violent pounce and grabbed her, pulling her over the edge of the cliff, and at last Connor could run with a shout. He broke across the clearing, running so fast he nearly toppled over, and he threw himself towards her outreaching hands as the dark fists pulled her over the edge, and his hand caught hers. This was the nightmare. This was the nightmare that woke him up screaming every night. This was it, happening right now, right here. He was on the cliff edge, bracing himself, holding onto his mother's hands with all his strength, trying to keep her from being pulled down into the blackness, pulled down by the creature below the cliff.
who he could see all of now, the real monster, the one who he was properly afraid of, the one he'd expected to see when the yew tree first showed up, the real nightmare monster formed of cloud and ash and dark flames, but with real muscle, real strength, real red eyes that glared back at him and flashing teeth that could eat his mother alive. I've seen worse, Connor had told the yew tree that first night, and here was the worst thing.
Help me, Connor! His mum yelled. Don't let go! I won't! Connor yelled back. I promise!
The nightmare monster gave a roar and pulled harder, its fist straining around his mother's body, and she began to slip from Connor's grasp.
No!
He called. His mother screamed in terror.
Please, Connor! Hold on to me! I will!
Connor yelled. He turned back to the yew tree standing there, not moving.
Help me! I can't hold on to her!
But it just stood there watching.
Connor!
His mum yelled, and her hands were slipping.
Connor!
She yelled again.
Mom!
He cried, gripping tighter. But they were slipping from his grasp, and she was getting heavier and heavier, the nightmare monster pulling harder and harder.
I'm slipping!
His mum yelled.
No!
He cried. He fell forward onto his chest from the weight of her and the nightmare's fists pulling on her. She screamed again and again, and she was so heavy, impossibly so.
Please!
Connor whispered to himself, please. And here, he heard the yew tree say behind him, is the fourth tale.
Shut up!
Connor shouted.
Help me!
Here is the truth of Connor O'Malley. And his mother was screaming, and she was slipping. It was so hard to hold on to her. It is now or never, the yew tree said. You must speak the truth.
No!
Connor said, his voice breaking. You must!
No!
Connor said again, looking down into his mother's face. As the truth came all of a sudden, as the nightmare reached its most perfect moment.
No!
Connor screamed one more time, and his mother fell. The rest of the fourth tale. This was the moment when he usually woke up. When she fell, screaming out of his grasp, into the abyss, taken by the nightmare, lost forever. This was where he usually sat up in his bed, covered in sweat, his heart beating so fast, he thought he might die. But he didn't wake up. The nightmare still surrounded him. The yew tree still stood behind him. The tale is not yet told, he'd said.
Take me out of here!
Connor said, getting shakily to his feet.
I need to see my mum!
She is no longer here, Connor, his original monster said. You let her go.
This is just a nightmare,
Connor said, panting hard.
This isn't the truth.
It is the truth, said the monster. You know it is. You let her go.
She fell,
Connor said.
I couldn't hold on to her anymore. She got so heavy.
And you let her go.
She fell,
Connor said, his voice rising, almost in desperation. The filth and ash that was taken his mum was returning up the cliff face in tendrils of smoke. Smoke that he couldn't help but breathe in. It entered his mouth and his nose like air, filling him up, choking him. He had to fight to even breathe. You let her go, said the monster.
I didn't let her go,
Connor shouted, his voice cracking.
She fell.
You must tell the truth, or you will never leave this nightmare, the monster said, looming dangerously over him now, its voice scarier than Connor had ever heard it. You will be trapped here alone for the rest of your life.
Please, let me go,
Connor yelled, trying to back away. He called out in terror when he saw that the tendrils of the nightmare had wrapped themselves around his legs. They tripped him to the ground and started wrapping themselves around his arms too.
Help me!
Speak the truth, the monster said, its voice stern and terrifying now. Speak the truth or stay here forever.
What truth?
Connor yelled, desperately fighting the tendrils.
I don't know what you mean.
The monster's face suddenly surged out of the blackness, inches away from Connor's.
You do know,
it said, low and threatening. And there was a sudden quiet. Because yes, Connor knew. He had always known. The truth. The real truth. From the nightmare.
No,
He said quietly as the blackness started wrapping itself around his neck.
no, I can't.
you must.
I can't.
Connor said again.
You can,
Said the monster, and there was a change in its voice, a note of something, of kindness. Connor's eyes were filling now. Tears were tumbling down in his cheeks, and he couldn't stop them, couldn't even wipe them away because the nightmare's tendrils were binding them now, had nearly taken them over completely.
Please don't make me say it,
Connor said.
please don't make me say it.
You let her go.
The monster said. Connor shook his head.
Please.
You let her go.
The monster said again. Connor closed his eyes tightly, but then he nodded.
You could have held on for longer,
The monster said.
but you let her fall. You loosened your grip and let the nightmare take her.
Connor nodded again, his face scrunched up with pain and weeping.
You wanted her to fall.
No.
Connor said through the thick tears.
You wanted her to go.
No.
You must speak the truth, and you must speak it now, Connor O'Malley. Say it! You must!
Connor shook his head again, his mouth clamped shut tight, but he could feel a burning in his chest like fire someone had lit there, a miniature sun blazing away and burning him from the inside.
It'll kill me if I do, he gasped.
It will kill you if you do not!
The monster said.
You must say it!
I can't.
You let her go! Why?
The blackness was wrapping itself around Connor's eyes now, plugging his nose and overwhelming his mouth. He was gasping for breath and not getting it. It was suffocating him. It was killing him.
Why, Connor?
The monster said fiercely.
Tell me why! Before it is too late!
And the fire in Connor's chest suddenly blazed, suddenly burned like it would eat him alive. It was the truth. He knew it was. A moan started in his throat, a moan that rose into a cry, and then a loud, wordless yell, and he opened his mouth, and the fire came blazing out to consume everything, bursting over the blackness, over the yew tree too, setting it ablaze, along with the rest of the world, burning it back as Connor yelled and yelled and yelled in pain and grief, and he spoke the words, he spoke the truth. He told the rest of the fourth tale.
I can't stand it anymore.
He cried out as the fire raged around him.
I can't stand knowing that she'll go. I just want it to be over. I want it to be finished.
And then the fire ate the world, wiping away everything, wiping him away with it. He welcomed it with relief, because it was, at last, the punishment he deserved. Life after death. Connor opened his eyes. He was lying on the grass on the hill above his house. He was still alive, which was the worst thing that could have happened.
Why didn't it kill me?
He groaned, holding his face in his hands.
I deserve the worst.
Do you?
The monster asked, standing above him.
I've been thinking it for the longest time.
Connor said slowly, painfully, struggling to get the words out.
I've known forever she wasn't going to make it, almost from the beginning. She said she was getting better, because that's what I wanted to hear. And I believed her, except I didn't.
No.
The monster said. Connor swallowed, still struggling.
And I started to think how much I wanted it to be over. How much I just wanted to stop having to think about it. How I couldn't stand the the waiting anymore. I couldn't stand how alone it would make me feel.
He really began to cry now, more than he thought he'd ever done, more even than when he found out his mum was ill.
And a part of you wished it would just end,
said the monster.
even if it meant losing her.
Connor nodded, barely able to speak.
And the nightmare began. The nightmare that always ended with,
I let her go.
Connor choked out.
I could have held on, but I let her go.
and that,
The monster said.
is the truth.
I didn't mean it, though.
Connor said, his voice rising.
I didn't mean to let her go. And now it's for real. Now she's going to die. And it's my fault.
And that,
The monster said.
is not the truth at all.
Connor's grief was a physical thing, gripping him like a clamp, clenching him tight as a muscle. He could barely breathe from the sheer effort of it, and he sank to the ground again, wishing it would just take him, once and for all. He faintly felt the huge hands of the monster pick him up, forming a little nest to hold him. He was only vaguely aware of the leaves and branches twisting around him, softening and widening to let him lie back.
It's my fault,
Connor said.
I let her go. It's my fault.
It is not your fault.
The monster said, its voice floating in the breeze around him like a breeze.
It is.
You are merely wishing for the end of pain,
The monster said.
your own pain. An end to how it isolated you. It is the most human wish of all.
I didn't mean it, though.
Connor said.
You did,
The monster said.
but you also did not.
Connor sniffed and looked up to its face, which was as big as a wall in front of him.
How can both be true?
Because humans are complicated beasts,
The monster said.
How can a queen be both a good witch and a bad witch? How can a prince be a murderer and a savior? How can an apothecary be evil-tempered but right-thinking? How can a parson be wrong-thinking but good-hearted? How can invisible men make themselves more lonely by being seen?
I don't know.
Connor shrugged, exhausted.
Your stories never made any sense to me.
The answer is that it does not matter what you think,
The monster said.
because your mind will contradict itself 100 times a day. You wanted her to go. At the same time, you were desperate for me to save her. Your mind will believe comforting lies, whilst also knowing the painful truths that make those lies necessary. And your mind will punish you for believing both.
But how do you fight it?
Connor asked, his voice rough.
How do you fight all the different stuff inside?
By speaking the truth,
The monster said.
as you spoke it just now.
Connor thought again of his mother's hands, of the grip as he let go.
Stop this, Connor O'Malley,
The monster said gently.
This is why I came walking. To tell you this, so that you may heal. You must listen.
Connor swallowed again.
I'm listening.
You do not write your life with words.
The monster said.
You write it with actions. What you think is not important. It is only important what you do.
There was a long silence as Connor recaught his breath.
So what do I do?
He finally asked.
You do what you did just now.
The monster said.
You speak the truth.
That's it?
You think it is easy?
The monster raised two enormous eyebrows.
You are willing to die rather than speak it.
Connor looked down at his hands, finally unclenching them.
Because what I thought was so wrong.
It was not wrong.
The monster said.
It was only a thought, one of a million. It was not an action.
Connor let out a long, long breath, still thick. But he wasn't choking. The nightmare wasn't filling him up, squeezing his chest, dragging him down. In fact, he didn't feel the nightmare there at all.
I'm so tired,
Connor said, putting his head in his hands.
I'm so tired of all this.
Then sleep,
said the monster.
there is time.
Is there?
Connor mumbled, suddenly unable to keep his eyes open. The monster changed the shape of its hands even further, making the nest of leaves Connor was lying on even more comfortable.
I need to see my mum,
he protested.
You will,
The monster said.
I promise.
Connor opened his eyes.
Will you be there?
Yes,
The monster said.
it will be the final steps of my walking.
Connor felt himself drifting off, the tide of sleep pulling against him so hard he couldn't resist it. But before he went, he could feel one last question bubbling up.
Why do you always come at 12:07?
He asked. He was asleep before the monster could answer. Something in common.
Oh, thank God!
The words filtered in before Connor was even properly awake.
Connor!
He heard, and then stronger.
Connor!
His grandma's voice. He opened his eyes, sitting up slowly. Night had fallen. How long had he been asleep? He looked around. He was still on the hill behind his house, nestled in the roots of the yew tree towering over him. He looked up. It was just a tree. But he could swear that it also wasn't.
Connor!
His grandma was running from the direction of the church, and he could see her car parked on the road beyond, its lights on, its engine running. He stood as she ran to him, her face filled with annoyance and relief, and something he recognized with a sinking stomach.
Oh, thank God! Thank God!
She shouted as she reached him, and then she did a surprising thing. She grabbed him in a hug so hard that they nearly both fell over. Only Connor catching them on the tree trunk stopped them. Then she let him go and really started shouting.
Where have you been?
She practically screamed.
I've been searching for hours! I've been frantic, Connor! What the hell were you thinking? There was something I needed to do, Connor said,
But she was already pulling on his arm.
No time, she said. We have to go. We have to go now.
She let go of him and actually sprinted back to her car, which was such a troubling thing to see. Connor ran after her almost automatically, jumping in the passenger side and not even getting the door closed before she drove off with a screech of tires. He didn't dare ask why they were hurrying.
Connor,
his grandma said as the car raced down the road at alarming speed. It was the only when he looked at her that he saw how much she was crying, shaking too.
Connor, you just can't.
She shook some more. Then he saw her grip the steering wheel even harder.
Grandma?
He started to say.
Don't, she said, just don't.
They drove in silence for a while, sailing through giveaway signs with barely a look. Connor rechecked his seatbelt.
Grandma?
Connor asked, bracing himself as they flew over a bump. She kept speeding on.
I'm sorry,
he said quietly. She laughed at this, a sad, thick laugh. She shook her head.
It doesn't matter,
she said. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't? Of course it doesn't,
she said, and she started to cry again. But she wasn't the kind of grandma who was going to let crying get in the way of her talking.
You know, Connor,
she said,
you and me, not the most natural fit, are we? No,
Connor said.
I guess not. I guess not either.
She tore around a corner so fast Connor had to grab onto the door handle to stay upright.
But we're going to have to learn, you know,
she said. Connor swallowed.
I know.
His grandma made a little sobbing noise.
You do know, don't you?
She said,
Of course you do.
She coughed to clear her throat as she quickly looked both ways of an approaching crossroads before driving right through the red light. Connor wondered how late it was. There was hardly any traffic around.
But you know this, grandson?
His grandma said.
We have something in common. We do?
Connor asked as the hospital lurched into view down the road.
Oh, yes.
His grandma said, pressing even harder on the accelerator, and he saw that her tears were still coming.
What's that?
He asked. She pulled into the first empty spot she saw on the road near the hospital, running her car up onto the curb with a thudding stop.
Your mum,
She said, looking at him full on.
that's what we have in common.
Connor didn't say anything, but he knew what she meant. His mum was her daughter, and she was the most important person either of them knew. That was a lot to have in common. It was certainly a place to start. His grandma turned off the engine and opened her door.
We have to hurry,
She said. The truth. His grandma burst into his mum's hospital room ahead of him with a terrible question on her face. But there was a nurse inside who answered immediately.
It's okay, she said. You're in time.
His grandma put her hands to her mouth and let out a cry of relief.
I see you found him,
The nurse said, looking at Connor.
Yes.
Was all his grandma said. Both she and Connor were looking at his mum. The room was mostly dark, just a light on over her bed where she lay. Her eyes were closed, and her breathing sounded like there was a weight on her chest. The nurse left them with her, and his grandma sat down in the chair on the other side of his mum's bed, leaning forward to pick up one of his mum's hands. She held it in her own, kissing it and rocking it back and forth.
Ma?
He heard. It was his own mum talking, her voice so thick and low it was almost impossible to understand.
I'm here, darling.
His grandma said, still holding his mum's hand.
Connor's here too. Is he?
His mum slurred, not opening her eyes. His grandma looked at him in a way that told him to say something.
I'm here, Mum,
He said. His mum didn't say anything, just reached out the hand closest to him, asking for him to take it. Take it and not let go.
Here is the end of the tale,
The monster said behind him.
What do I do?
Connor whispered. He felt the monster place its hands on his shoulders. Somehow they were small enough to feel like they were holding him up.
All you have to do is tell the truth,
The monster said.
I'm afraid to.
Connor said. He could see his grandmother in the dim light, leaning over her daughter. He could see his mum's hand, still outstretched, her eyes still closed.
Of course you are afraid,
The monster said, pushing him slowly forward.
and yet you will still do it.
As the monster's hands gently but firmly guided him towards his mum. Connor saw the clock on the wall above her bed. Somehow it was already 11:46 p.m. 21 minutes before 12:07. He wanted to ask the monster what was going to happen then, but he didn't dare, because it felt like he knew.
If you speak the truth,
The monster whispered in his ear.
you will be able to face whatever comes.
And so Connor looked back down at his mum, at her outstretched hand. He could feel his throat choking again and his eyes watering. And it wasn't the drowning of the nightmare, though. It was simpler, clearer, still just as hard. He took his mother's hand. She opened her eyes, briefly, catching him there. Then she closed them again. But she'd seen him. And he knew it was here. He knew there really was no going back. That it was going to happen, whatever he wanted, whatever he felt. And he also knew he was going to get through it. It would be terrible. It would be beyond terrible. But he'd survive. And it was for this that the monster came. It must have been. Connor had needed it, and his need had somehow called it. And it had come walking, just for this moment.
You'll stay?
Connor whispered to the monster, barely able to speak.
You'll stay until...
I will stay,
The monster said, its hand still on Connor's shoulders.
now all you have to do is speak the truth.
And so Connor did. He took in a breath, and at last he spoke the final and total truth. I don't want you to go, he said, the tears dropping from his eyes, slowly at first, then spilling like a river.
I know, my love.
His mother said in her heavy voice.
I know.
He could feel the monster holding him up and letting him stand there. I don't want you to go, he said again, and that was all he needed to say. He leaned forward onto her bed and put his arm around her, holding her. He knew it would come, and soon, maybe even this 1207, the moment she would slip from his grasp, no matter how tightly he held on.
But not this moment.
The monster whispered, still close.
Not just yet.
Connor held tightly onto his mother, and by doing so, he could finally let her go.